Welcome to the Prospective Doctor Podcast, where we will provide essential information for pre-medical students and those already in medical school. Listen each week for tips on how to improve your application and gain an acceptance to medical school.
Welcome, everybody, to the first ever podcast for med school coach and prospective doctor. We are launching a podcast series that will give you a lot of great information on the application process. And today I'm actually joined by Dr. Renee Marinelli and Dr. Harvey Katzen, who are experts in the field of admissions and what it takes to get into med school. And I'm going to cue them in a second here. Today we're really going to be talking about letters and the letters that medical schools want to see. Lots of students always have questions on when should I write a thank you letter, when should I write an update letter, what is an update letter, what is a letter of interest, so on and so forth. And we're hoping to kind of cover some of that today. So, as I said, I'm joined by Dr. Renee Marinelli, who serves as Director of Advising at Med School Coach and was a former admissions committee member at UC Irvine. Hey, Renee.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I'm also joined by Dr. Harvey Katzen, who is an oncologist in the D.C. area and a former admissions committee member at George Washington University. Thanks for joining us, Harvey.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to join today.
So a lot of students have questions, and they come to us with tons of questions on these letters. What should I write in my letters? What should I write in my thank you letters? When should I send them? What is an update letter? I wanted to kind of get your guys' perspective on, first, what an admissions committee really does with letters that come to them. And maybe we can start with just that simple thank you letter. I think most people out there know that after their interview, they should write some kind of thank you letter to their interviewer. But I think a lot of people are confused on what it has to entail, how to do it. Should it be handwritten or emailed? Where do they send it? How do they attach it? Dr. Katz, do you have any thoughts on letters and thank you letters specifically after an interview?
Sure. First of all, I would point out and stress that the thank you letters, whether they're handwritten or emailed, become a part of the actual application. So I think that the letter writer, the applicants should be very careful about being spell checked, grammar checked, not necessarily putting any unusual abbreviations in it, and it should be formal, short, and to the point. One of I think the most important things from my standpoint, particularly as a former admissions committee member, is I think it's very important to receive the letter quickly after the interview. And if the applicant and the interviewer engaged on any specific topics, such as sports or, not necessarily anything medical, that you should put that into the letter to remind the admissions officer who you are. I think we all know that once the interview is over, almost every admissions officer fills out a form that they turn in by the end of the day. But if they get a letter that really interests them or they feel deserves further attention, not only does it get forwarded to be a part of the application, but it may be forwarded with a note, this was a really interesting applicant. I really enjoyed meeting him, really conversed with him on a number of subjects. And the letter can stimulate that. And sometimes the admissions officer might even end the note with, I really think we should give this applicant a chance. I would recommend we accept them. So my tips basically are, I think that most admissions officers would like to see a note if they're going to get one fairly quickly, particularly if you're going to utilize email. I would do it within the next day. And if at all possible, write about something that you and that interviewer engaged about.
So it sounds like Dr. Katzen is really picking up on an important topic, which is how much that interviewer can actually impact your actual application and the judgment by the admissions committee, and sort of making the great impact somehow on them with that post-interview thank you letter can actually play a pretty big role, it sounds like. Dr. Marinelli, did you come across situations that you ever got a thank you letter or you saw a thank you letter being sent that actually made you think, wow, I don't want this person at this school, or I'm going to this negatively impacted the application?
Wow, I've never actually ran into that situation, but I can imagine that other people have. I think if somebody makes a thank you letter that's just very generic and doesn't really apply to the interview that just took place. Like Dr. Katzen said, perhaps recall something specific to that interview that you and the interviewer discussed so that it is very specific and genuine for that school, showing your interest and your appreciation for interviewing at that school. If someone just sent like a generic letter saying, thank you for this interview, I had a nice time, I hope to come to this school, I think that could really negatively impact an application, because admissions committees are definitely able to see if somebody just writes a generic thank you letter and sends that to every school that they interview at. So they should take some time to really think about what they're going to write and write a sincere letter to each school. And the other thing too, I would say that potentially could negatively impact an applicant is if the applicant did not send a thank you letter. Not every interviewer will expect a thank you letter. It's a pretty common approach to send a thank you letter, but not every interviewer is going to be waiting for it or not. But there will be some specific interviewers that will really want to see a thank you letter and see a follow-up from that applicant. So for those people that just do not send a thank you letter and they interview with that specific type of interviewer who expects it, that could be a negative impact when that interviewer is reviewing them for the admissions committee.
So I always have this question, and I wonder what you guys think, because I'm one way and I can give you what I think in terms of what I expect or what I want when I see that thank you letter, in terms of, do I want it emailed to me or do I want a handwritten note to me? And I can tell you that for myself, when I get out of an interview a couple of days later, if I get an email that's rather generic and something that doesn't necessarily impact me or connect to something I talked about in the interview, I'm most likely going to ignore it. Not that I don't think it's a good addition. I will certainly think positively of the applicant, but I'm probably not going to take too much time to write back to them, especially when I've interviewed 10, 15 people that day. Conversely, sometimes if you get a handwritten letter, you can really feel like, wow, somebody's really taken the time to put in the effort to kind of write this letter. What do you guys think? I mean, is a handwritten letter better? Is an email better? Is a combination better?
I usually suggest people send a combination. I think a handwritten letter is awesome. A lot of people do not use snail mail these days. So when people do receive a letter in the mail, it is a little bit more special and shows a little bit more interest and attention that that applicant took. Lots of times to people that I talk to, though, I suggest sending it both ways, just so that you can, as much as possible, guarantee the receipt of that letter. If you send a handwritten letter and you don't know the exact building or room number that professor's office is, there could be a possibility that it's not delivered. I usually suggest to cover your bases and just send a handwritten one and email it as well, to guarantee, like I said, as much as you can that interviewer did receive it.
I would agree with that. I think it's a nice touch to do a handwritten note, but I would also emphasize that if you're going to do that, you want to do it fairly quickly, just because the decisions are going to be made relatively soon, usually after the interviews. But I agree with Dr. Marinelli. The combination is good. The email obviously can get there faster, so that they've got you in mind, but it is a nice personal touch to get something that's actually written.
Yeah, I mean, the only caveat to that I'll say for those of you guys who are listening, if your handwriting sucks, do not be writing a handwritten letter. It's one of those things that, and honestly, I write like a 3-year-old, because I've been typing for so long that my handwriting is terrible. And I don't know if I would want a thank you letter from myself handwritten that looks like a 3-year-old has written it. So just something to keep in mind for all you guys out there.
Definitely agree with that.
Another common question that I think comes up a lot is, hey, I just had an MMI interview, right? We know that a lot of schools have changed to MMI format. This is a popular format. Schools are using it. You get multiple interviewers. You get 8 or 9 people or 8 or 9 scenarios, and you haven't really connected with anybody or met anybody. What do you do in that situation in terms of writing a thank you letter?
Dr. Katzen, you want to take that one?
Sure. First of all, I do think if it's possible, as you leave each interviewer, I think you can ask for their contact information. Some will, and particularly in an MMI, most of them will not really give it to you. But again, because of what the three of us are saying, that we feel the concept of a thank you letter is appropriate, I still would write a letter thanking them for giving you the opportunity to interview to the admissions committee and or the dean of admissions, thanking them for the opportunity. Even on an MMI, it's more than that. Usually, almost always during the day, you've had the opportunity to interact with students or tour with a resident. And if you can mention to me, I feel it's very appropriate to mention, I really enjoyed meeting with Dr. X, meaning one of the residents or the second year students. I think, again, it shows that you, the applicant, have shown an interest in the school and are appreciative for the opportunity to have been given an interview. And for those who you may not be able to directly thank, but to thank the group essentially for taking the time to spend with you that day.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely should still be in contact with them and thank the admissions committee, or like Dr. Katzen said, the director of admissions in general for that interview day, and try to, again, make it specific as possible. Say, I really enjoyed conversing with the students, or the lunch that we had with the faculty, or things like that, where you can add some specifics to the interview day and make it a little bit more just what you enjoyed about it and what you found that you liked about the school.
Have you guys ever not responded to a thank you letter, or maybe taken a little too much time to respond? Or do you guys respond to every thank you letter that you get?
I tried to respond, or I tried to when I was interviewing to respond to thank you letters. I don't think every faculty member or every interviewer is going to respond to a thank you letter. And in that case, if I was an applicant, I wouldn't be too worried if you do not receive a response, especially if you only send a handwritten response. Somebody might not take the time to actually sit down and address a response back to you. I think email, most people will try to respond. But in that case, if you do not receive a response, as an applicant, I wouldn't say that this reflects negatively on your application or the review of your application. I wouldn't worry about if you didn't receive anything back from that person. Dr. Katzen, what do you think?
I would agree with that. With email thank you notes, it's very easy just to reply, thank you for your note, essentially. And the handwritten ones, it's less likely to expect a response. But I agree with Dr. Marinelli has just said, and that is whether you do or do not get a response, I would not let that concern you, either that it wasn't received or wasn't received favorably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I sometimes respond, but most of the time I would say I don't really have the time to necessarily respond to each and every one, nor do I have anything interesting to say to all the applicants that I've potentially interviewed. So if you haven't gotten one, don't be too worried. It doesn't necessarily mean too much. So I think that provides a pretty comprehensive overview of the thank you letter. But now a lot of students have a ton of questions on update letters, especially around now in the application process. It's around December in the application process. They may have interviewed at a school and not heard from them yet. They may have interviewed and been waitlisted, or they may have not heard anything at all from a bunch of schools. What do you guys think about this concept of update letters? For instance, how did GW see update letters, Dr. Katzen, when you sat on the committee?
First of all, let me just say that if there's nothing meaningful to update, sending a letter that is really not giving any information is not really viewed particularly favorably. However, a letter that has something to update, either new volunteering activity, certainly changes in academic status, or the research that you had mentioned is now being presented or abstracted or published, clearly are appropriate to update the school with. For those that have either been waitlisted or interviewed and are waiting and it's getting on in the season, and again, this depends on each applicant's feeling about a particular school, but I think sometimes a letter indicating that you're continued interested in the school and assuring them that if accepted, I would attend, I think that letter does get some attention because the schools are playing to some extent statistics in that if they want a class of X of 200, they're probably going to accept at least 10% more. And if somebody's on the waiting list, if they're indicating that they would definitely attend and a seat opens up, that might be somebody who might be moved up the waiting list fairly quickly.
Dr. Marinelli, do you have any thoughts on sort of how that was utilized at Irvine?
Yeah, I think it was utilized pretty similar. So the update letter at Irvine would kind of be added to your file, and everybody's file would be reviewed periodically if they're on the wait list. So I think if you have some additional information, like Dr. Katzen was saying, to share or update them on an activity or something that you've done since you've submitted your primary and secondary application and possibly even after the interview, then I think that that update letter can actually really help, because they can just take that additional information and say, hey, look at what they've been doing in this time, or they're really showing a strong commitment to this, and it can strengthen your application. In my own personal experience, even at UC Irvine, that was my top choice school I wanted to go to. And I had gotten some acceptances on the East Coast, which I was just thrilled about. But I was still on the wait list at UC Irvine after interviewing with them, and I was still really hoping to go there. And I sent in an update letter with some more information about things I had been doing. And a coworker of mine, a physician's assistant that I work pretty closely with, also sent a letter of recommendation too. And UC Irvine did accept those. And I got off the wait list maybe about 2 to 3 weeks after the submission of those. So, it's hard to say how much of that was due to my updates, or they just actually re-reviewed my application and liked it. But rarely do update letters hurt you, but they do have the possibility to help you.
I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and when I advise my students to write update letters, I would echo what Dr. Katzen said is, you really got to have something meaningful to say. But I would say that a lot of people do have meaningful things, whether it's an update of grades or an activity that they've kept doing, or even the possibility of highlighting and emphasizing something that may have been swept under the rug or maybe wasn't brought up in the interview. I think an update letter gives you the opportunity to do that. I just had a student, for instance, who interviewed at 2 places, and he's a great kid. He's actually founded a nonprofit, done all kinds of incredible stuff with that nonprofit. And while we emphasized it in the primary application, it didn't really come up on the interview, he said. So I said, hey, I think in the update letter, this may be a good opportunity for us just to remind that admissions committee, hey, remember this nonprofit I founded and all the incredible things we're doing there? I think that's a good way to potentially use it as well for some schools. And it does make an impact. I can't tell you how many times I've had students who I've advised and we've written and edited a thank you letter, an update letter, and then a couple of days later they get an acceptance or something along those lines, right? I mean, listen, schools are human. They want to move you up and down their rank list. They want to feel like they are wanted just like anybody else does in reality.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
There's also this concept. So there's update letters, and then there's the letter of intent, right? And I think this confuses some applicants and some students, and it's potentially just a language thing, right? What's the difference between an update letter and a letter of intent? I've always thought of it as, if you're going to write a letter of intent, you are telling some school that, listen, no matter what, I am coming here if I get in. Do you guys differentiate that at all in your minds?
My answer is absolutely. As I was mentioning before, one of the concerns that an admissions committee has is they actually do want to fill all of their seats. And there are statistics of how many they accept and what percentage of the acceptees will attend. And when you're at a point of filling seats, particularly after the first round, and you now have a waiting list, seeing a letter from somebody that absolutely is telling you they're going to come does make an impression on the admissions committee, very much so.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I get this question a lot as well. People ask me if I write an update letter and I say, I will absolutely attend your school if accepted, am I lying? Or should I not say that? Or should I only say that to my top choice school? I say for update letters, you can end it with something like, I would be honored to receive an acceptance or admission at your school. That's not committing yourself at all. You want to avoid the language of committing. Obviously, an update letter is not binding, but I think just to be honest and forthright, you should try to avoid that strong language of saying, I would absolutely attend. Just make it more of an appreciation and how much you would like to go there, but keeping your options open.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about update letters, and I think this is awesome information that both you guys have been able to give our audience in terms of what is a committee really looking for? How can you utilize these update letters effectively? I wonder if there's a story or there's something you guys know, or there's an applicant that you guys have worked with or something along those lines, or maybe not an applicant you've worked with, but somebody who you've come across in the admissions committee who's ever just either blown you away with their update letter and that person had to get accepted because of their update or their thank you letter, or we talked about this a little bit earlier with Dr. Marinelli, is there something that somebody has written that absolutely says, nope, sorry, you are not getting in? Dr. Katzen, do you have any stories like that?
Actually, I do have one. We had an email from a student, and he put a link to a YouTube of him in a band. It was very good. It was enjoyable to watch, and it actually got passed around the admissions committee. Obviously, he was exhibiting a talent, and there was a rationale for sending the letter because it was actually a fundraising activity that they were part of. And quite honestly, multiple members of the admissions committee talked about it and enjoyed it. And I thought that was quite unique that somebody would send a link to them actually performing in an event.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. That's obviously something that I wouldn't recommend everybody do. Don't all everybody go out there and start recording YouTube videos of you singing. But if you've done something really incredible with it, you can see how much of an impact it can make. And, you know, it could make or break your chances of getting into a medical school. That's great. I'll share with you, I've come across a lot of letters, and I'll say a lot because it's more than just a couple of letters that have been addressed to the wrong school. And that's just one of those things that obviously doesn't paint a great picture. So just double check yourself. Make sure you're sending the letter to the right people at the right school and using the right names, because once you don't do that, obviously you get into a lot of trouble in terms of how that interviewer or how that admissions committee member is going to perceive you.
Yeah, definitely. And I would add to that too, make sure that the school you are sending an update letter accepts additional information. Most schools do, but some schools specifically state on their website, we do not want any additional information after your secondary or after your interview. So you should really respect those schools' wishes and not just send them information. So make sure you're checking before you just go out and send a letter to a school.
I would agree with that. You have to respect the wishes of what the schools do and do not want in terms of being updated.
Agree. So let's sum it all up. Bottom line, update letters, thank you letters can make a huge impact, but don't mess them up. Make sure that you think about them. Make sure that you're writing them in an appropriate way. And if you have any questions or need any help, there's a lot of people out there, including ourselves, obviously, who can help you through something like that and make sure that you're writing letters the correct way and basically having the best impact you can on your individual application. So with that, I want to thank Drs. Marinelli and Katzen for joining us today, and for everybody out there for listening in. We're going to have a lot more podcasts coming up, so make sure that you stay tuned. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you're subscribing to your podcast. Lots of interesting discussions to be had in the coming months and years as you go through the application process and become a physician. We're always here for you, so hit us up with any questions that you have at any time and share with your friends. Thanks again, Dr. Katzen. Thanks again, Dr. Marinelli.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey.